Awesome. So thank you all so much for being here today. Today we're doing our second part of a three-part series on kind of authentic. The term at one point was authentic collaboration, which you'll see on my slides, but I'm really much more about authentic integration and what does it look like to really engage youth and young adults in all places of like decision-making power, and decisions that we make in our work. And so this session is really going to focus on last time, we talked a lot about perception and implicit bias, got ourselves kind of some shared understanding and definitions around white dominant culture and the ways in which this impacts how we all show up at work, whether we're working with young folks or not. This session, we're really going to focus on working with youth and young adults and working with our YABs and like how different things show up in that work, particularly looking at how trauma might impact that work. Caroline, that should have gone out in the follow-up email from our last session, but what we'll do is when we do the follow-up email from this session, we'll send a link to both because I'm recording this. Also, it is in the drive under community resources. So any of the slides and any of the recordings we do on things like this, you can find in the YHDP community resources drive. If you don't have access to this, because I do know that this is kind of a broader COC meeting space, again, we do send out follow-up emails that will have both a link to the slides and to the recordings. So again, thank you all so much for being here today. We have a lot to cover. Who am I? Who's here? Who's here talking to you if you have not been here before? So my name is Ria Azam Morris and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am currently based out of Spokane, Washington. I am one of the programmatic side technical assistants for the Youth Homelessness Demonstration program that you have your community received a grant for I want to say you were awarded in September of 2023. And I've been working with your incredible YHDP team and your core team, many of whom are in this room right now, for the last few months on supporting getting your coordinated community plan done and submitted, which let's take 1 second before we introduce Aaron. I'm sorry, but I want to take 1 second to like fully celebrate your community. For those of you who do not know the amount of intense work that it takes to get a coordinated community plan pulled together in 6 months, what your community has done, what your YAB has done, what your COC YHDP team has done is incredible. So anytime, and what you have all done is really incredible. So if you get a chance, if you see one of your YAB members, one of your YHDP team, which is going to be like Monique, Mar, Gershom, Amy, like please, buy them a cup of coffee. Like the amount of work that they've had to do, or let them have a day off. It was intense. It's amazing what you have created, and yeah, we have work ahead of us, but I'm just want to take the second to really celebrate y'all for the work you've done, because it's been amazing, which is why we're here today, right? To talk through working with youth and young adults and what that might look like. So that was a really long way for me to introduce myself. I am Ree. I'm one of the technical assistants, and today I will be we'll be supporting leading this training. I will pass it off. Yes, I want to go have coffee with Monique, y'all. Erin, if you want to introduce yourself, I would love it.
Thanks, Ree. Hi, everyone. Nice to be back here with you. My name's Erin Rutherford. I use she, her pronouns. I am white. I live in Louisville, Kentucky, and alongside Ree, I provide technical assistance on behalf of HUD for the YHDP grant. Happy to be here with you all.
Awesome, thank you. And okay, let's see. I don't want to I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I do think one of our other TA colleagues is here, is Zaya, who's been working with your YAB, with the YAB in Riverside. I don't know if you want to say what up. I don't want to put you on the spot. You feel free to do it in the chat if you don't want to come off mute, but I'm happy to see you here.
Hi, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, so yeah, it's cool. Okay, cool. Hi. All right, so we're gonna do intros and check-in. This is a large room. This is a really kind of intensive check-in. If you've been in spaces with me before, you may have already done it. I would love it if a couple of folks would come off mute and otherwise to just share with us. But otherwise, if you want to drop in the chat your name, your pronouns, your race, the role that you have in this community, and then our check-in question really is, what's your why, right? We like to ask this question to give folks a chance to get to know one another and know more about why we're in these spaces. And so like, if you ask me what's my why, I was a formerly homeless young person. I hitchhiked and slept out and was unsheltered between about the age of 17 and 25. And I always, even back then, was like, I'm gonna go work in the system one day and I'm gonna like help people because this is BS and we can fix it. And so that's really my why, and it's why I show up every day. And so if y'all want to drop, a sentence or two about why you're here, anybody who feels comfortable to come off mute and wants to share, we would just love to know kind of like, yeah, what's your why? Like what draws you to this work?
My name
I'll
is
come off
Charles
mute.
Putman. I am a man, male. I profess male, was it he, him? I'm considered to be multicultural, I would assume. It says race, but I identify as more than one race. My community role, I'm a pastor. I am a regional director for Mercy House, Riverside County. And my why is, this is what God made me for. I mean, I fell right into this as long as I could remember. I was the kid who was walking down the alley, helping the homeless folks down the alley, taking them food from my house when I was 5, 6 years old on the way home from school. And I've just continued to do it all my life. I do this because that's what God requires me to do.
Mm. Thank you, Mr. Charles. Really appreciate that. And we're really glad you're here. Thank you for sharing that. Caroline, I saw you come off mute as well, if you'd like to share.
Sure. My name is Caroline Quintos. My pronouns are she, her, hers. My race is white. My community role is housing navigator with the Thrive Independent Living Program with Oak Grove Center. And why? I enjoy meeting new people. I like working with young adults, and I don't know, it feels meaningful and fun at the same time. So that's why.
Thank you so much. We have time for like one, maybe two more folks. If anybody else wants to share off mute, I do see the chat popping off, Aaron, if you want to call anything out you see in there.
Deanna is sharing how they are a worker with foster transitional youth and feels like youth are their customers. So it sounds like she brings a very customer service edge to her work.
Yeah, that's dope. Thank you for that. Anybody else? Okay. All right, friends. Well, then I'm going to turn this over to Aaron to take us through our commitments today, and then we're going to dive in.
Thanks, Reed. Oh, and I just saw Desir's comment in the chat. We have another YAB member here today, so glad to see we have a few YAB members participating today. So welcome. So if you weren't here for our last session, as a reminder, these are some of the group commitments that we're going to set for our time together today. Just going over a few of these. So some of the content that we might hear today may feel a little bit uncomfortable, but just want to, welcome that discomfort and honor the wholeness of each other as we're here today. Ree likes to say we are all human, and we want to provide space to allow everyone to be human. We do welcome curiosity and questions. We're all here to learn. So please, if there's anything that you're thinking, not sure if you want to say it out loud, chances are someone else is probably thinking it too. So we definitely welcome any questions, comments, curiosity that folks have. And lastly, we welcome one another to be here today and show up however we can. So again, we know sometimes some of this content can be a little intensive. If you need to take a break, go off camera, step away for a second, feel free to do so. Definitely take care of yourself and, just show up in the best way that you can. And we're here to support you with that. All right, Ree.
Thanks, Aaron. All right. Well, the first part of this day is really investigating trauma and its impacts. And when we dive into this, like we recognize that the experience of housing instability, really housing instability, that isn't even just like, it's not only if you're experiencing homelessness, it's not only if you're sleeping outside, right? That not really knowing what comes next is a we hear so much in our world, in our field, about post-traumatic stress, right? The housing instability is in and of itself traumatic stress, right? And we know that, right? But that also means it shows up in the work that we do, and it shows up in the work we do pretty routinely in this space, particularly for youth and young adults who may be here trying to help drive change. So when we're gonna kind of dig into a couple of pieces. A lot of this is adapted from work. So just quickly, when I first started in my position, I was handed a booklet called Street Culture, a study that was written by, frankly, an older white man who was like an anthropologist who had no lived experience of homelessness. And they said, hey, we want you to take this and create a training on authentic engagement with youth and young adults. And I was like, well, I don't know how this guy's going to know anything because he has no experience in this at all. And I was really irritated by it, if I'm frank with you. But I went through the material, and some of it was almost kind of, for me, life changing, to understand things in a way about my own self that I didn't know. So some of what we talk about when we talk about trauma today is adapted from that study, and I will send out the link. So for those of you who like to go and read things, because I'm definitely one of those people, you'll be able to go kind of deeper dive into this. But as we're talking about trauma and its impacts, I want us to think about this quote. Is anybody comfortable with maybe coming off mute and reading this?
Sure, I will.
Um,
You don't have to save me. You just have to hold my hand while I save myself. Unknown.
Thank you so much, William. I just want us to sit with that for a second. I'm traditionally really uncomfortable with quiet, but I want us to sit with that and really reflect. And I'm curious what comes up for y'all. Young me, I see your hand up.
I can go for free to read it if you want me to.
You're welcome to. William did just read it. But if you want to read it again, because we're asking folks to have a little bit of reflection, I would love that if you would like to.
Sure, that's fine. Didn't know that he read it. Sorry, my bad.
That's okay.
See, it says that, let me zoom it in one second. Okay. Says that you don't have to save me. You just have to hold my hand while I save myself. Unknown.
Thank you so much, young me.
I would like to say that some of the youth that we support, they don't want to be fixed and they don't need to be fixed. And so we have to, at least in the school district, we have to realize that we have to take off that always trying to fix it hat in order to just listen to what they need. And if it's to hold their hand or just to lend an ear while they try their best to do what they can, when they can, at their own pace.
Oh, thank you so much, Deanna. Deanna, I'm sure, I hope I didn't say that wrong, but thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Carolyn, I see your hand.
I think what comes to mind is like just thinking that like the biggest gift you can give someone is to be present with them and not to try and save them or fix their problems. I think when people oftentimes have like a savior complex, either subconsciously or consciously, it steals agency from the people who are experiencing the direct harm. And so, for example, I spent much of my time going in and out of foster homes. And by the time I believe I was like in 10th grade, 11th grade or so, 15, 16. One of my foster families was like, oh, well, you don't want to be part of our family. This and that. And I think it's at that point, I was like, I'm not looking for a family. And so when you take off this savior complex lens, you're able to actually hear what people want and what they're saying they need. and be an ally to them in what way is acceptable for them.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna move on. There's nothing else that needs to be said. I'm like, that's a mic drop. Thank you for sharing that. Seriously, thank you. I want to point out though that both folks we did hear from raised this idea of young folks don't need to be fixed, right? When we are going through this work, it is a constant and consistent reminder that in so many ways we are products of systems, and the system, and that's what YHDP and the work of YHDP is really hoping to focus on, is how do we achieve a systems change that recognizes that youth and young adults experiencing homelessness do not need to be fixed. Oftentimes in this age group that we're talking about, which is 17 to 24, for a lot of folks, they had a safety net during that era of their life. Not everybody, but a lot of folks. A lot of folks went to college, they screwed up, mom and dad had their back, but they were able to make a lot of mistakes to learn and have that kind of safety net of space to screw up and space to course correct. And a lot of what one of the greatest things we can offer to youth and young adults that we walk alongside is the agency to make their own decisions and to learn from those things and to support them in that process, not to try to stop it or head it off at the pass, but to say, we like to focus on like where, oh, my brain just went dead. Sorry. There's a term I'm trying to remember right now. Strengths-based model. If you're not familiar with the strengths-based approach, it's one I would highly recommend folks look into, because the concept behind that is we're laying out, what are your dreams? What are you awesome at? And how can we use those things that you're awesome at to support achieving those dreams? And sometimes those dreams do not align with what we expect it to be, right? And so that is the work of us as providers, as older adult partners, is to recognize that it is not our place to have expectations of what is right or wrong for a young person who's experiencing homelessness. That's not our role. Our role is to be kind of like the guy at Home Depot that can point you out to where you need to buy the things to fix your plumbing, but isn't going to go to your house and fix the plumbing for you, right? Because that's not their job. Their job is to say, here are the tools that you need. I might have some answers, but the actual plumbing fixing that's not your job, right? That's not the guy's job that wears the orange vest. I like to use that analogy. I keep it in my mind a lot, because your job is to know where to find the things, right? But it is not to tell folks where to put the things. So just something that we can keep in mind. So when we're thinking about the impact of trauma, right? When we're thinking about youth and young adults, especially YAB that we're working alongside very, very consistently, trauma shows up, and it shows up in all kinds of ways. And so when we're talking about the concept of the impact of trauma, we will see it show up from time to time in a myriad of ways. These are a handful of them. So you have to consider that, like, due to past and continuing trauma, street dependent youth will often have gaps in their memories, and it will prevent folks from being able to see the past as like a continuum. And so the past is really viewed as this big storage area from which it's not always easy to like retrieve memories in an ordered and consistent manner. And so when we think about the expectations, right, of you need to be at this meeting at this time every week, you need to do this thing every day, putting in place supports, right? Maybe it's a phone reminder, maybe it's saying, hey, let me help you out with like building a calendar. I know for the YAB in Riverside, the YHDP team, your YAB support team, that's going to be, Monique and Marin Gershom, they have a calendar that they send out every month that lists every place that folks need to be. They send follow-up emails to remind folks ahead of time. We have to remember that trauma is this thing that's floating around, whether it's happening in this moment to someone or not, right? It's in our bodies. It's still in my body. I'm like almost 20 years housed up, and I've been in therapy, and I come into these spaces and into this work, and there are moments where I'm working with young people, especially who have experiences similar to ones that I had, where trauma like pops up for me, right? And my job is to kind of go, okay, we need to put that in a container. We're going to be present in this moment. And then I'm going to call my therapist when I get out of here and be like, okay, I just had a trauma episode, right? Because it is a thing that's inside of our bodies. it can make the concept of like the present, uh, like being only what is here right now, nothing else. Like I'm not thinking about the thing I have to do in 30 minutes. I'm not thinking about the thing that someone's asked me to do tomorrow. I am here and I'm in this moment. It is immediate. It is what I can see, what I can hear, and what I can feel. And the thing is for a lot of young folks experiencing homelessness, there is really very little ability to conceive of like a future, right? Because it's not a medium that we work within. We are here, we are surviving. That is what we are doing. Thinking about tomorrow is really thinking about what, like for me, when I was a street kid, if I slept in the wrong alley, bad things could happen, right? So my job was to constantly be on top of what I needed to do to stay alive. And that doesn't go away just because you get housed, right? That doesn't go away just because you get the honor or the privilege or the opportunity or access to be a part of something that's like designing a system, right? That doesn't end because you now have some levels of stability. And in fact, it can often get raised up the more like access to stability you get. Something I wish someone would have told me 15 years ago is that like with every kind of quote milestone achieved, right? Buying my first house, getting a job that allowed me to like live more freely, like these things, every single time I like achieved a thing, trauma like flared up inside of my body that I had to go and work through, right? And so one of our kind of greatest challenges, I'm sorry, I'm kind of going, trauma is a hard thing to talk about, y'all, just in case you didn't know. But one of our greatest challenges really is to learn to work within a street youth, like a young person experiencing homelessness. The terminology in the study is street dependent youth, right? But one of our greatest challenges is to work within that concept of time and also work to support expanding upon that concept, right? So how do we support putting into place for youth and young adults opportunities? And so again, your team, your amazing YAB support team, they already do a lot of those things, right? Creating different methods of communication, whether it's using a Discord or a chat or a text message, having that monthly calendar go out that is updated and correct, sending those follow-up emails and checking in, right? All of these things are things we can do to support the evolution of our work with youth and young adults, right? And showing them that they have people here to support them, that they're not just being, they're not being given, they're not here to check a box, right? Because it can feel that way when you come into this work. Other things to consider around working with youth and young adults, right, is this concept of, side note, do y'all see this picture? Oh my gosh, do you see the picture right here? Do you see it? That's me in the orange shirt right there. I must have been, I don't know, 22, 23 maybe. That's me under my bridge that I slept under at 24th and Lamar when I was a street kid with all my friends. I don't know where that picture came from, and I'm not sure why I have it still in my trainings, but it's just to show like family, because that group of people, they were my family, right? They were the people that I relied upon, and they relied upon me. And I think for a lot of our work, it's really important to recognize that like this concept of street family and also street identities, which are two kind of different things. But with street family, it really, they've done studies and it is shown that these are the same psycho-emotional attachments and family dynamics that we find in a biological family. So it's very often it's like, these are my cousins, sometimes they can be like siblings, but like, this is my family, this is my connecting point. And sibling rivalry, that's absolutely a thing that pops up, right? I think a big mistake that we can make, and I bring this up because I've seen it happen over and over again, is we push really hard to be like whole humans together. And being whole humans means being a little bit vulnerable, means being a little bit like honest. And in workplace environments, a lot of workplaces, they're kind of toxic. They've got that like water cooler talk, they've got that like, oh my God, girl, I mean, this person over here, I cannot. And for a lot of folks in like a working environment, that is a way in which they bond. And I would encourage all of you to be very mindful of the ways in which you talk about other youth and young adults with youth and young adults, because that can really really cause damage in the relationships being built for a number of reasons. One, if you are talking trash about another young person to a young person, their mind is going to go, well, if you can talk shit about, excuse my language, if you can talk trash about them, you can talk trash about me, right? So automatically. And the other thing is, we might see youth and young adults like get into huge, really big fights that to us are like, oh my God, their relationship is severed. But that's not really the case. It's going to be like, I'm gonna fight you today, and like, but tomorrow if somebody's coming for you, like it's that kind of same kind of thing, right? Where it's like we can talk about each other, but if you talk about me or you talk about them, you're not allowed to do that. You have not earned that place, right? And so a thing that I've seen over and over again is folks trying to like form a bond by being like, oh, this person, da 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 da, because that's very common in our workplace environment. It's toxic and not good, but it's a common tactic. One I would absolutely encourage all of you to like never, never, never do. Because oh, I just saw Chantel's chat. I'm sorry. Because it really can impact your ability to build relationship, and that the root and key of this, and you're going to hear me say it over and over again, is building relationship. None of this work is going to happen, and it's definitely not going to happen authentically if you have not taken the time to get to know people, to get to know one another, to hold space for each other. And that goes both ways. It's bi-directional. But when you hold the proximity to power and privilege, which you will always be on the side of proximity to power and privilege, regardless of your intersecting identity, right? Because you are the person who is representative of the system. And so even if you're like me and you're somebody who has this lived experience of homelessness, you've been through this, you're like, yeah, we're on this page. We're not on this page. Because at the end of the day, for me, I work for HUD, right? At the end of the day, for like, I don't know, for Mr. Charles, he works for Mercy House, right? So you still hold this power. So when you hold that power position, the onus is on you to hold and create the space that allows for relationship to be built. Another piece to keep in mind around things like street names and street stories, around street identity, right? Always respect somebody's name. This should not be a new thing or a new concept for anyone. But if a young person comes in and says, this is my name, and maybe for 3 years that was not their name, this is their name. And you have to honor and respect that, because there are reasons. People, one of the things around trauma and trauma responses is very often that people will try to like recreate or erase a quote victim identity, and they will do that by using new name, using having new stories. And so that's where the street stories piece comes in. Street stories, I don't know if y'all have ever met somebody who's like, my cousin is Beyonce, right? That's the thing. It happens. It's out there. It's real. It's in the world, right? Oftentimes though, when we're working with youth and young adults and we feel as though they are telling us something that is untrue, right? It's really important to note that when you are actively existing in trauma or working through or working out of trauma, and you are recreating your identity, that a lot of people will be like, oh, they're lying, right? But it's not lying in the sense of I'm wanting to deceive you and get away with or pull one over, right? It's in the sense of I am creating an identity where I am not someone who has been hurt, where I am not someone who has been victimized, right? And it's important that we hold both of those things as true. It doesn't mean
You said Friday at 2? Oh, I'm sorry.
no, you all right, friend. Don't worry about it. So these are pieces to keep in mind, right, as we're navigating through this work, that trauma is going to show up, and it's going to show up in ways that we don't necessarily know about or we're not necessarily like familiar with. And part of our work, right, is to navigate through those pieces alongside one another, right? It is not your job to be like, you're lying, you're this, you're that, blah, blah, blah. That's going to destroy any opportunity to build relationship, right? Your role is to be a support person, right? Is to be a person who is walking alongside another fully developed human being who is going through a hard time and offering the support and access that you have, and access to resources that you have. A big part of this is listening. What does it mean to really hear somebody? I know we opened our last session with the question of what is like one word for what it feels like to really be heard. And we talk about that a lot. I'm going to actually, on our next piece here, we're going to have a short clip of a video with Thich Nhat Hanh, who is speaking. It's Oprah. Listen, he's talking to Oprah, but speaking about compassionate and deep listening. So I'm going to ask that we take this moment to kind of hear this. Gosh, I hope it works. And Aaron, you're the only face I can see. So when I hit play, if you can hear it, will you thumbs up me? Thank you.
You refer to, I can't remember which book, but you talk about deep listening also.
Deep listening is the kind of listening that can help relieve the suffering of the other person. You can call it compassionate listening. You listen with only one purpose, help him or her to empty his heart. And if you remember that you are helping him or her to suffer less, and then even if he say things full of wrong perceptions, full of bitterness, you are still capable to continue to listen with compassion. Because you know that listening like that, with compassion, you give him or her a chance to suffer less. If you want to help him or her to correct his perception, and then you wait for another time, but for the time being, you just listen with compassion and help him or her to suffer less. And 1 hour like that can bring transformation and healing.
So I love this idea of deep listening, because oftentimes when someone comes to you and they want to really vent, they want to purge whatever is going on inside them, people start talking and giving advice. So if you allow the person just to let whatever those feelings are to come out, and then at another time come back to them with your advice or your comments, you would experience a deeper healing. That's what you're saying.
Yes, the fear, the anger, and the despair is born on the ground of wrong perception. And we have wrong perceptions concerning ourselves and the other person. And that is the foundation for conflict and war and violence.
You've said that the only way we can begin to end war is due to communication between people.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And we should be able to say like this: dear friends, dear people, I know that you suffer a lot. I have not understood enough of your difficulties and suffering. It's not our intention to make you suffer more. It is the opposite. So please tell us about your suffering, your difficulties. I'm eager to learn, to understand. You have to start like that, loving speech. And if we are honest, if we are true, they will open their heart and tell us. And then we practice compassionate, deep listening. And during the process of deep listening, we can learn so much about our own perception and their perceptions. Mm-hmm. And that is the best way, the only way to remove terrorism.
Terrorism, or even difficulties between yourself and
yes.
family members or friends.
Yes.
And the principle is the same no matter the conflict.
Yes.
Terrorists, anti-terrorists,
yes.
father and son,
right.
Yourself and your boss,
right.
Yourself and your children, your best friend.
Yes.
I see you, young me.
Oh, no, I was going to say something, but I can say it later if you want me to.
No, you're welcome to. Why don't you say something while I figure out how to close this full screen over here?
I don't know, I was going to say that that I kind of like this video because like, it kind of like, it touched my heart, because it's good to hear other people's story. You never know what they're going through. Just to open and listen, and it could be a struggle and a difficulty by hear them what they're going through, and you might never know. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that. That was a really perfect, like summary, really, right, of what we just saw. And thank you for sharing that. So we're actually going to do an activity and hope that, fingers crossed, this one works out better than last time. I really need to ask for this activity, though, that everyone be present. So if you are here and you've got folks like emailing you, or you're trying to answer questions or something like that, please, for the next like 10-15 minutes, if you can put that on pause. So we're going to do an activity around practicing kind of active and deeper listening, and kind of talk together about what that experience is like when we come back at the end. So what's going to happen is we have breakout rooms, and it should be, based on the number of folks here, 2 of you in each room. So that's why it's real important that if you're here, be here, because there's only gonna be 2 folks per room. And this won't work if somebody's stuck there by themselves. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually take turns, both as a storyteller and as a listener, right? To kind of get that experience and that practice of what is it to be actively listening, and what is it to really be heard, right? What is that experience? And so what we're going to ask is, when you go into these breakout rooms, each of you, you're going to take turns. So the first person will take 2 minutes to talk about your motivation. So kind of like the what's your why. I was kind of prepping y'all for this, right? Getting your juices flowing. So what you're going to do is talk about what are your motivations for working with youth experiencing homelessness. And as the listener, you're going to practice listening without interrupting. You may ask things like, what else, or what happened next, right? After that 2 minutes is up, we're going to actually switch. And so you'll get a message from me when it's time for you to switch. And then we're going to have the listener now be the person who talks for 2 minutes, and talks about what their motivations are, and have the original talker will be listening. When we come back, we're going to take a few minutes to reflect on like, what was the experience of focused listening? And then we're going to kind of together discuss, have some discussion questions around like how this impacts our work and how this can be brought into our work. So I have already created breakout rooms. It looks as though, again, based on the number of folks here, we are going to have, wait, let me look at how many people are here before I mess this up. 33. Okay. We should have enough for there to be 2 in every room. There may be 1 room with 1 person, in which case I'm gonna ask Erin if you'll hop into that room to do the activity, so I can manage timing it on this end. I would really appreciate that. So is this like clear to everybody what we're about to be asking folks to do? Can I get some
Bree,
thumbs up?
go
Yes.
into the breakout session, will you still be able to see the instructions here on the slide, or will those disappear? Just wondering if we should type in
Oh,
chat.
they will disappear, but I can put them in the chat right now. Give me 1 second. 1 second before we do that. Also, I don't think it's gonna record anything if you're not in the main room with me, but I am gonna go ahead and pause the recording for this section, because we are asking folks to kind of like talk about their experiences, and we want to make sure that people feel safe in doing that. So actually, I'm going to give me 2 seconds here, and I'm gonna find where it lets me pause my recording. For anybody watching the recording, we just did a small group breakout session. You will have access to do that on the slides. So if you're going through this for like a training, or you're going through this on your own, you will have access to be able to do this activity. Let me get the screen back sharing. So we came back and we talked about what it was like to share while being listened to. We heard a little bit about some difficulties, right? Sometimes it's hard when you're listening to not get distracted and want to be like, oh, I want to say that because I know what you're talking about. Yeah, but we're here to listen. And then talking about the deeper listening impacting our partnerships, and really talking about the ways in which this work requires us to have an ability to create spaces that we can connect as people. Right. And so that's really what we just dove into. But do like to keep folks have a space to be able to be honest, which is why we paused that recording. Low key, Monique Mar and Riverside team, I might edit this before I send it on to be uploaded. But just so y'all know. So we're going to talk about some principles of engagement, some implementation, and some best practices. That is kind of where we're at. This is going to be more of me talking. I'm sorry, but it's really good information. And hopefully it will help support y'all in building out really more engagement and work with youth and young adults. So when we talk about principles of engagement, right, and ways in which we can create our systems and rooms to be more accessible, right? Yes, inviting. We love that word. We want inclusive is like the big word now, but really it's about how do we make this accessible and what that might look like. And so one of the things we first have to think about is the ways in which our system stifles authenticity for youth and young adults that are walking into the space, right? So when people feel unsafe to voice an opinion, then we don't get to hear it. That's pretty obvious, right? If I don't feel like I can come in here and say some stuff, then you gonna miss out on what I have to say. Now, the way I present in a lot of spaces, people didn't mind that until I started talking. And then they went, oh, dang, she knows it, right? But they didn't give me a chance when I walked in the space because I walked in looking like a street kid. I don't know if any of you have been in an on-site with me, but I'm covered in tattoos, right? I smoke cigarettes openly. Like I am very real and authentic. And what that means is a lot of times people don't think that I have anything valuable to say until they hear me open my mouth. I happen to be someone who will push around feeling unsafe. So I'm gonna be like, nah, I'm gonna be loud as I can be. But not everybody is that way. So if our space is not a space that folks feel able to voice their opinions, we're missing out on. Like, and the whole point of the work of YHDP and working alongside youth and young adults is to get that internal systems expertise, right? Is to build those relationships with young people who have walked through this system and they're going, hey, let me tell you, this doesn't work. Let me tell you, this could work. Why haven't we tried that yet, right? But if we are in a room that feels stifling, we don't know people, we haven't been introduced to somebody, I'm not going to say nothing. Why would I do that? Also, if people think that no one actually cares about what they have to say, they're not going to talk, right? Like if you can look me in my face all day long, the danger in the work that we do is the people who know the right words, but don't actually live into the work that we keep saying, right? And that is something I think we've seen reflected in many spaces. We talk about racial equity, we talk about LGBTQIA inclusivity. There are a lot of words, the buzzwords that everybody knows, and I know what to say, and I know how to get through this, but I'm not living it because I don't believe it. And one of the hardest barriers for young folks or anyone with lived experience, frankly, that are open about their experience to overcome is that our system does not, at this moment in the culture of our system, does not actually view experience as expertise. And we'll talk next week more about how, or in 2 weeks when we do this again, in hiring youth and young adults, we'll talk about ways in which we can show that there's actual value there, right? And living under capitalism and inflation and housing crisis, one of the ways we can show people their value is to pay them a livable, and not livable, but thriving wage, right? Which low key, your county is really has worked very hard. Again, I'm shouting out your YHDP team for the work they've done to like get some solid compensation in place for youth and young adults. If your organization is planning to bring together youth and young adults to get feedback, to get engaged in that decision making, make sure you've got a plan in place for how you're going to pay them. Because listen, ain't not one of y'all sitting in this room for free right now, you know? Right? Like, why should we ask anybody else to do that? Also, groupthink can get real dangerous. If people don't feel safe to share what they actually think, and the person who has all the power in the room, and let's be real, we know those people exist, right? We know in power dynamics and spaces that there are going to be the one or two people that really actually make all the decisions, even though they say and everybody else gets to, right? And so it's real easy to go along to get along. And so what happens then is youth and young adults who are coming in the space are going, never mind. We're not. And I think the key to this slide where it says not just that the energy goes flat, but innovation dries up. If we don't feel able to really share to affect change, then change doesn't happen, right? So we have to be mindful of how these spaces really create, can create just walking in can create a stifling of authenticity. So some things you can do, and I'm not going to read this whole slide to y'all, but I am going to send this to you because it's really valuable. There are some pointers and tips here for like, if you're in a work group meeting, what are some ways in which you can actually like create a brave space, right? This slide says psychological safety, which I'm here for, but I'm much more about bravery than I am about safety. Because the truth is, if you've been harmed by the system, you're not ever safe with that system. But I can be brave, right? I can be brave, but I might not be able to be safe. And we have to acknowledge that as being true, right? Especially when we start looking across intersections of identity. So some things that you can do to create a space that allows for bravery and innovation. Creating those ground rules. And again, this says psychological safety, but to encourage more authentic voices to come forward. You saw at the very beginning of this and the last session, we've got those agreements, right? Of like, it's going to get uncomfortable. We're going to lean into that together, right? If it gets too uncomfortable, we're going to let ourselves step out and be whole people, right? So creating spaces like that, creating opportunities like that makes a huge deal. Be aware of your biases, right? There's always that urgency to end on time, and we want to get deeper into the conversation, and you might be the one that wants to get deeper in the conversation. Hi, that's me. And you might be the one that's like, we got to end this meeting on time, and that you don't like the me that wants to keep going on this conversation, right? We have to be mindful of how our biases are impacting how we're showing up in these spaces. Are we not speaking because we don't want other people to be uncomfortable? Right? Let's get there. So there's a phrase used by the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. They do the Undoing Racism training. I highly recommend checking them out. Any organization that's looking into doing any type of racial equity, while we're still allowed to do that, I would say check out psab.org. I'll send it along when I send the video. You want to really think about that growing edge. It can be uncomfortable to be the person that has to say, we're asking the wrong questions, right? And it can be uncomfortable to realize when you in some of these spaces that you might be the problem, right? So we just want to be able to sit in that space and try to stretch a little bit. I'm not asking anybody to harm themselves. We don't need to do that. We live in this world. We know what it is, but stretch a little bit around that discomfort. Try to get folks to use I language. That's very like kind of basic common stuff if you've ever, been in elementary school. But it's true, right? Like, don't say, well, you did this thing. Be like, I have noticed this. Offer observation. Offer with zero value judgment. That can be hard because sometimes people will receive observation as judgment, and so you got to navigate that space. But just try to keep it in this like, this is what I see. This is what here's the objective thing that I'm seeing, rather than you're doing something wrong. Also, give folks praise. Were y'all here when I was like, hey, come on through Riverside for the work y'all did on that CCP? You need to hear that. Y'all need to hear that. And the youth and young adults that you work with desperately need to hear that. Desperately need to be positively reinforced and encouraged, because this is a real scary world. So when even if it's something to you that doesn't seem like, whatever, but it is an achievement. Recognize that achievement, affirm that when it's real and it happens. And also like, don't be the like nice, oh no, I can't say it that way. Be real. That's all. Sometimes when you get vulnerable and someone's like, thank you so much for sharing, that can feel kind of gross, because you're just like, oh God, all the right words. But if you genuinely are like, thank you for that, right? Offer that up, acknowledge what it takes for somebody to be a whole person. Support differences to emerge, stay present. One of the things that ICF that we have in our group agreements is that email will be there after this meeting. We are not supposed to be checking that email. We are supposed to be in this space. If you are in meetings with youth and young adults, especially in this Zoom world, and you're off camera and you're checking emails and you're answering phones, let me tell you something. The youth and young adults recognize that you are not present, right? And they're like, all right, well, that's just not somebody. Now, that doesn't mean you need to be on camera 24 hours a day, because that is taxing. But staying present, right? If you're off camera, stay engaged in the chat, and know that like, we got to be here together to get this done. Yeah, stay curious. And I don't know, acknowledge the diversity of perspective. This is a long one to get into. Just acknowledge that everybody's going to be coming from a different place, and that that's allowed and needed. And that maybe the things we're bringing, it's what I'm bringing isn't the whole thing. What Deanna is bringing isn't the whole thing, but maybe what we're bringing together, we can pull pieces from that to create, right? If you are looking at systems change, you are looking at co-creation. And what can that look like? So again, acknowledge that everybody's got a different opinion and comes from a different place with this. Some other pieces. we're working with both allies and naysayers. So what that means is like, you know, you're gonna have either people who are like, heck yeah, let's like dismantle and rebuild. Like I've been going, and then you're gonna have people going, whoo, put the brakes on, like hold on, right? We have to work together to find compromise, right? We have to know what our hard lines are. Like we have to know, like, I'm not gonna step beyond this, right? I won't work with somebody who's being overtly racist and unwilling to learn from that. That is a line for me. It doesn't matter if I'm assigned by HUD. If that is continuing to happen, I will go to HUD and say I cannot work in that community any longer, right? You got to have like your hard lines, but you also have to be able to find a way to build compromise that doesn't feel like um exploitation, right? That doesn't feel like you want to work to find that solutioning together in a way that can really support the evolution of y'all's work, right? And so things that we can do, especially if we're in this side in particular, is if we're like fighting about something, right? If me and you are in some kind of conflict, right? We want to think about accepting that we have played a role kind of in co-creating this situation. That can be really, really hard. Let me tell you, as a person who has lived experience, who has a myriad of other intersecting identities that are marginalized, also as a person who is a representative of HUD. So when I walk into spaces, I got a whole lot of power, and that's real uncomfortable for me, right? Because I'm very used to not having any power. And so now when I walk in as that power player, the power position in the space, I have to recognize the ways in which I show up have an impact that I may not even be aware of. And so if there's a conflict there, I got to pause for a second and go, okay, I need to hear. I need to hear from this person what that perspective was on that experience, because I may agree with it or not, right? There's a saying they always say, like, never, never like never apply malice when it could just be ignorance, right? Like I can't remember how that phrase goes, but basically what the phrase is saying is that somebody just might not know any better, so don't attribute malice to it, that they're being mean. They just might be ignorant, right? But I want to name a thing about that. If the outcome of my ignorance or my malice is the same, it doesn't matter that it's just that I didn't know any better, right? We like to hide in that a lot. Oh, I didn't know that, I didn't know that. It's okay that you don't know it, right? Part of your job is to learn it. And when you cause harm in that power position, right, it doesn't actually matter that you didn't mean to do it, because the harm has now been caused. So our job is to course correct, is to work to address that harm, is to work to change, right? And that can be really scary and hard, especially if we're like, but I wasn't trying to be mean. But it's okay. It didn't feel good to the person you were working with. You got to work with them on how to navigate that space, particularly when you're working with youth and young adults, because again, in that situation, if you're on this side of the table, you do, unfortunately, under our structure of systems, hold the power, right? So it's really big on you to try to like repair, to restore. You want to keep working with folks that we like. We're not always going to like each other. I don't know if y'all know a lot about the union movements that like got us things like weekends and 5-day work weeks and stuff like that, 8-hour work days. They weren't homies, right? They didn't like each other. Like in that, there was a lot of infighting with the Wobblies and it's a whole thing. It's a great history. I recommend looking into it. But what I'll tell you is they recognized that they were working toward a common goal. And that common goal was for the betterment of everyone. So sometimes we're gonna have to work with people that we don't like. And that's just a reality. And we got to find a way to navigate that and not let the fact that we don't like them show up on our faces and Zoom calls. Look, I got to work on that on a regular. I've had Aaron text me in meetings before, not in Riverside, but in other meetings, and go, check your face, you know? And I'm like, oh no, I'm on camera. So we just got to be mindful that can show up sometimes. We also have to recognize that thinking, reflecting, and listening and talking, these things are as essential as the action. We exist in the tension between the sense of urgency that we don't ever want to see anybody sleep outside. We don't ever want to see anybody who doesn't want to be outside have to be outside. And we live in a world right now that is not designed to make that an easy goal, right? So we got all this urgency around that. But the truth and honesty in it is that we also have to be intentional about how we move. Because if we move too quickly, when we make mistakes, I'm not the one that gets hurt by the mistake that you make, right? It's not you that's going to get hurt by the mistake. It's going to be the young person that is trying to get housed. And so we have to be deeply mindful of that while also moving quickly to address an emergency. And so we have to remember that we need to create these spaces for kind of that back and forth thought generation. We need to be able to talk through conflict. We need to be able to have that space. I'm not saying that's the only thing we should be doing. I'm saying that too often we overlook doing it because we think we're too busy over here. And if we were doing a little bit of this too, over here would be a lot less of a burden, because many hands make less work. You can't have many hands if you're not building these relationships, right? And also be willing to speak up and rise above. If you see a colleague that is like being, we talked about adultism last time, but if you see a colleague that's like talking down to a young person, that's shutting down a young person's ability to engage in the work, that is gatekeeping power, and you are a colleague watching that happen, be willing to speak up about that. Culture shift happens, like I said earlier, when you're the one that's like planting seeds. So just keep that in mind. Also, that builds intentional and amazing relationship with youth and young adults, because you're showing you're not just somebody who gets it, but you're somebody that's willing to stand up for it, right? Because I can get it all day long, but if I'm going to be silent in the face of it, then it doesn't really matter, right? So keep those pieces in mind. All right. What are we doing next? Balancing inclusion and depth in meetings. Hey, that's dope. That's what I was just talking about, how sometimes we want to dig into it and sometimes we got to get our stuff done. So we got to make sure that we're still doing all of these things, getting that meeting done, and also allowing for that space of deepening our understanding and our alignment with one another, right? And so some things that we can look at. Oh God. Oh, this slide is overwhelming me. We'll get like caught up in this. Okay, we got to get everybody to be heard, and we got to get through this agenda, and we got to do this. And if I don't do this, then we're not letting everybody be heard. And then it just kind of makes you shut down, right? Because now you're going, oh gosh, listen. And I'm a facilitator. It is hard to navigate when these big, heavy conversations come up. And part of what we need to be doing is always allowing space, some space, right? If you go into a meeting that you're about to facilitate and you know that some stuff's about to pop off, you need to be holding in your mind, okay, we're going to put a container on this. We know it's going to happen. We need space for it to happen. We have 60 minutes together. We're going to spend 15 of them, 20 of them allowing for this space to happen. And then I have to come in as the facilitator and say, all right, we need to close this container. We can touch base on this, next week. We can do a meeting. It could be an ongoing thing on your agenda if it's a big thing you need to work through. But you need to allow space for it while also allowing space to like get the work done, right? Because at the end of the day, this is a federal grant. You got to get the work done. We all know that. So how you balance that will look at whatever, you'll have to look to what your level of comfort is as someone facilitating these spaces. Yes, the presentation slides are going to come out with the recording. So you will get all of these things. Sorry, I'm kind of hopping between like screen sharing, reading chat, all these things. All right. A couple of other things to keep in mind, y'all. We might actually be getting, we might be done earlier than, it depends on how much you let me talk. All right. So, but we might get to end this a little early. A few more things to consider, right? You need to expect tension. There is a reality that there's challenge in this. Especially if you're working with a youth or young adult that has recently been homeless, because I'm going to tell you something. I walked into every room with I say now a chip on my shoulder, but at the time I would not have said that. And actually, I'm not even sure I should say that. I think that's too loose of language. I walked in with an expectation that the system was not here for me, right? And that I was going to have to figure out what I needed to figure out on my own, because I was taught by the world that I have the only thing that I can rely on is me, right? And I was taught by the system that they were going to hurt me. I can't be honest about drug use. I can't be honest about mental health struggles, because if I am, now I'm going to lose my spot. Now they're going to kick me out of the program, blah, blah, blah. Even if that's 100% not true, we're housing first, right? So none of those things count against you. And in fact, in a lot of vulnerability indexes, which is a whole other thing, they will help you get housed faster. But I'm not going to trust the system to say that's not real to me. So when we doing this work, we need to be expecting tension. We need to recognize that it's going to show up, that we're not always going to agree with each other. And we also want to make sure that we're able to challenge one another. And when it comes to holding people accountable, they don't like it. They don't like it. They get real upset. I get real upset. It's hard when it's come to me that I've done something wrong, I have to sit with it going, oh, because, you know, immediately you feel guilt, immediately you feel shame, all that defensiveness rises up. And the thing is when we on this side of the table, like I keep saying, right, we are the ones that have to hold that accountability. That is our job. Our job is to be accountable to the young people that we are walking alongside, to the HUD grant that we just received, whatever it is, right? That is our job. And it can be a struggle, right? I've heard so many people that are service providers that do this work, that dedicate all of their lives every second of the day, have their own secondary trauma from it, coming to me talking about, this young person went off on me and I don't even want to mess with them because they don't care about this, they don't care about that, they don't want this, they don't want that. And I have to pause them and go, listen, like, that hurt you, and it's okay that that hurt you. It's not okay that it happened. It's okay that you feel hurt by it, and you need to feel the hurt by that. You need space for that. And also, do not turn that into what this young person did this, did that, did this. You need to be asking the right questions, right? When our defensiveness pops up, ooh, Deanna, you just like gave me a hook for this. Thank you. But it's true. Like, we need to be asking the right questions. We need to, and those questions sometimes are challenges to ourselves. And we got to sit with that. We want to address challenges. We want to have a plan for how we address conflict, right? Because if you write that stuff down, then when something happens, you can go, hey, hey, remember how we all agreed on this together? Remember how we wrote this down and signed our names and said, yes, we pledged to this. We did the fist of five, like whatever. Well, we aren't holding up our end of this bargain, right? We said we were going to do this thing and now we're not doing it. And we need to be able to, so y'all need to have a plan for how you address those things when they arise, because they will. And part of that plan is getting some structure in place, right? You want to strengthen relationships around participating groups to build power for change, right? This whole thing when Deanna was speaking, and I'm like, you saw Caroline Carolyn in the chat, and I'm going, y'all need to be building relationship here. That's what that means, right? Build those relationships so that you can like do this work. And really, this last one is the most important one to me, right? Which is to welcome new accountability as right? Welcome accountability as an opportunity to transform your practice, right? Don't see it as an attack. It's not an attack. I never walked into any space. I went hard on that organization when I worked there. And when my boss looked at me one day and said, Ree, it's like you hate this place, I started crying. I was like, why would anybody think I hate this place? This place saved my life. I know what this place is capable of, and I know what this place is selling, and I know what it's doing. And I know that there's a way to bridge us from what we're saying we're doing to actually doing it. That's not me hating this place. That's me trying to create something better for the ones that come behind me, right? So that's a huge thing for us to keep in mind when we're working with youth and young adults, because sometimes it can feel like they're coming for like the core of who you are. I think Mr. Charles was saying, like, I was called by God to do this. A couple of folks said that here, right? So then when somebody comes for like the work you do and goes, like, this is not working, this is bullshit, which happens, especially if you've built a good enough relationship with somebody that they feel safe enough to be angry with you. That's like a gift, right? But it's about us changing our framework on that, right? Recognizing that if I'm working with a youth or young adult, especially one with a traumatic background, who comes to me and gets angry with me, that is evidence that I have created a relationship with them where they feel safe to express themselves, right? Where they feel able to breathe enough to say, I'm angry with you. That's not a thing that they do get. You don't get to be angry when you're being abused, right? Like you don't get that opportunity to have feeling. So when it comes time to be held accountable, and also note that sometimes people are just mad and they'll get over it too, right? Like sometimes it's not this huge, like we have to change the system. Sometimes it's just like, you did this thing, it didn't feel good to me. And you go, I didn't realize I didn't feel good to you. I want to talk, like, I'm really sorry that I did that thing. And also moving forward, I'm going to do it differently, right? Like, it's an opportunity to evolve. We want to change our system. Using accountability to do that will transform our practices, right? Oh, okay. Co-create tangible opportunities to collaborate. That's a huge one. Sorry. So this says PLE on it. If you see the phrase PLE, it means people with lived experience. I apologize that I didn't, I'll clear that acronym up in the slide before I send them out. I am one, right. We should be in spaces where we are I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted by the chat box. The goal and dream of YHDP is that youth and young adults are designing and like leading the charge of the work that is happening in the system, right? Of the innovation, of the change. They are saying, we know what happens out here. Here's what we actually need. And then the community is going, all right, we got money. We're going to fund this thing that you need, right? Giving folks an opportunity to co-create our own like future, the level of agency that that can create for somebody to be able to be in a space and say, I asked for this thing because I knew it was needed. And then, like, I'm gonna be real with you, and something you got to be real with youth and young adults that are on this call. Yeah, members, I want you to hear me now when I say this. There is stuff you have said in the last 6 months that 3 years from now will have transformed the Riverside system, but it's gonna be in like 3 years. And we have to be prepared for that. And I think that's the one thing we do not sell correctly under YHDP. This is not instant transformation. This is a lot of grueling work and sitting in rooms and listening to retalk and going to trainings and doing flip charts. And sometimes you look at it and you go, oh my God, what am I even doing here? Because nothing is happening. And then you do like me and you leave your community, and then you go back and visit 3 years later, and everybody's going, oh my God, let me tell you about like this new program that's happening, and we just have 60 young people doing this, and you remember that you did that, right? But you don't see it happen while it's happening. I had a realization only just this last week of like, oh dang, like 30% of the tools used by the technical assistants for all of YHDP on how to do YAB compensation, I literally created them when I was working in Austin because we didn't have a structure. It had to be built somehow. And I was like working with another community, and one of my colleagues pulled this thing up and I went, wow, that looks really familiar. And then I went, oh, that's mine. And of course, it's evolved over time, as it should, right? This should always be evolving. But I say that especially for you YAB members that are on this call, you have no idea the one word, the two words that drop out of your mouth that become what leads the charge in 5 years. And it takes a really long time, and it requires a level of patience that I don't think should be asked of y'all, frankly, honestly. And it's something that you should be aware of, because you have no idea that the impact that you're having. And one day you're going to look around and go, oh my gosh, this like thing that just housed 40 young people, we built that thing, right? And so I plead with you to stay the charge, because if you hang out, you will see it. And even if you don't hang out, come back and check in and you'll find out. And it's look at Monique. Oh my gosh, Monique was a YAB member, right? Like, look at what she has done from coming from where and I'm not saying any of that to say y'all should be like us, because everybody has their own separate journey on how they get to where they going and what they got coming next. I'm just saying you have evidence in front of you of folks who have quite literally been exactly where you are and have affected change in their community. So when it feels hopeless because you're sitting in 30 meetings this week, like, remember that exists and that it's real and that you are doing it right now. You are doing it right now. And to older adult partners in this community, be consistently reminding folks of that. Be consistently bringing that up when you're working with the youth and young adults, of like, you are doing it now. You're just not seeing it yet, because that's how the system is like, sludge. It moves slow, we all, I mean, it sucks, but it's true. Okay, I think we only got two more things. Always provide context. If you're inviting a youth or young adult into a space that they have not been into before, you want to ensure that documents, websites, resources, everything that can provide clarity not only are provided ahead of time, but let me be real with you, not everybody wants to read all the documents and watch the videos and do the resources. So it's not just give me the tools in that instance, right? It is also like, hey, do you want to hang out for like an hour ahead of this meeting? And let me talk you through what's going on. Let me give you some context, right? It's also like, hey, do you want like a board buddy? If you're joining a new board for the first time, is there somebody here that like and feel good with, that y'all can work together, that can kind of be your like not a mentor, but somebody to like who's been doing this work to kind of provide you with some context to support. If you got a question in the middle of the meeting that you don't want to ask the whole room, you can shoot a little quiet DM and go, hey, what is this, right? Like creating those relationships. That's why everything we talked about earlier with this deep listening, like for a lot of folks, I understand that what I train on does not feel relevant. Like you said, a lot of people are sitting in these trainings with me going, I got like 30 kids right now, 30 young people, not supposed to say kids. Sorry, that is a hard habit to break as someone who used to be a street kid. That was part of my language. I'm working on it. So recognize, please. We don't say that word. It's really diminishing. But you know, a lot of y'all might be, I got a caseload of like 30 people right now, and this woman's over here talking about deep listening and like, oh my, you know, da da da. But the thing is that these pieces, they don't take us a lot of extra time, and they increase the ability to build change in a way that is like astronomically worth it. It is worth the extra 5 minutes. It is worth it for what you see in your outcomes. It's just that, like we just got through talking about with youth and young adults, seeing outcomes takes time. Shifting a culture takes time. And it's like, you know, I've been talking system. Systems are people. All of us, this system, this nebulous system we keep talking about, we are that system. We are it. So if we want system to change, we get the opportunity to be a part of that, right? By doing something as small as taking an extra 5 minutes to be still and listen. The impact that that has is wild, right? Give somebody an hour to kind of talk through, and not just talk through like, here's what all the paperwork means, but talk through like, listen, just so you know, when you walk up in here, this organization is not doing great with this organization. So be careful what you say about this thing. Because when I walked into YHDP and doing TA, nobody did that for me. And I put my foot in my mouth day one and didn't know it, right? Give people the context they need. I'm not saying gossip. I'm just saying be aware of. If there are challenges in the community, challenges between this group or that group, let folks know so they're not walking in unprepared. You aren't walking in unprepared. Why would you ask somebody else to do that? So providing context is huge. Very last thing I'm going to touch on, and then we're going to leave space for any questions and more talking, and I'll stop the recording. Is where did it go? Come back. This one, greetings matter. This is huge, right? How we introduce ourselves and how we are introduced, it impacts how we are perceived. And I don't know why this has to be a slide, but apparently it does, right? Like this needs to be taught everywhere. Greetings matter, right? I am so much more than somebody that used to have lived experience, right? That I am so much more than somebody that used to be homeless. So much more than that. But when I walk in spaces and that's how someone has introduced me in that space, I know I know how I'm going to be perceived. Y'all, I gave a talk at the National Alliance Conference last year in a wet bathing suit. I had a cover up on, but it was hot. I had been working the whole time I was there. I had 45 minutes between one thing and this presentation. So I went to the pool in the hotel because I was miserable, right? And I literally, thank you so much, Connie, like got up and gave a talk kind of similarly to this one. And the very first thing that I said was, y'all already know that I used to be homeless. So you have already decided if you're going to listen to me or not. And I know that. I know that walking in the room. So I'm going to come up in here in my wet bathing suit because I'm miserable and I'm talking about being a whole person. Let's be a whole person, right? Like, I know that. Youth and young adults walking into these spaces know what the stereotypes about us are, right? So I'm walking in already expecting you to not be hearing me. So how you introduce me to somebody else, A, is telling me how you view me, right? You bring me into a space and say, this is, this is Maria. She's a young person with lived experience that used to be homeless or is currently homeless. And she's a mother and she's this and she's that. The first thing anybody's going to hear is she's a young person that used to be homeless. And they're going to say she can't understand the complexities of this work. Because that's what we get told all the time. It's too complex. I don't even understand it. How could I expect a youth or young adult to understand it? Well, y'all can learn together, right? Like, what you mean, right? So how we introduce people, it matters. We learned this doing TA. On round 4 or 5, when I walked in to do TA, I was introduced to my communities as the YAB, like, support TA with lived experience. And what that meant was the way I was treated and viewed by that community was forever skewed in that direction. Not seen as a whole TA, not seen as somebody with the ability to answer programmatic questions. When we got into round 7, Aaron and I had a whole conversation about how are we going to do this, right? How are we going to introduce ourselves? And so we introduced ourselves as equal people with the same title, right? We are HUD programmatic TA. And the difference in the way in which I've been received by this community versus other communities is wild. And even still in this community, right, there have been some struggles. I don't know if that's related to my previous homelessness or not, but you know how you show up matters and how you're introduced matters. And if you're going to introduce me by throwing me under the bus, then I'm not going to show up and be involved in this work because I already know, you know? So it's important to like, and it's important to talk to the youth and young adult too that you're inviting into a space. How do you want to be? How do you want to be introduced, right? Do you want us to say that you're a YAB member? We could just say that you're a young person that lives in the community who's concerned about youth homelessness and has a lens on it that we're interested in. Bam. We ain't got to say nothing about homelessness. We ain't got to say nothing about what our stories are to let other people make decisions about who somebody is before they can speak, right? So that matters. So I'm done. That was a lot. This is our time for questions and reflections. I'm going to stop the screen share. And I'm going to ask for this period, do you want this piece to be recorded or would y'all like this piece to be not recorded as a community? All right, well, let's just record it then because we're just asking questions. Yes, ma'am. Deanna, that was for you. Put your hands up. I'm sorry.
I wasn't sure who you were talking to. Thank you so much for this discussion and for this space. I wanted to share with you all that I went to a workshop that was youth-led, and so they shared about their lived experiences. And I asked the question to the panel. I said, you know, we at different agencies have to identify certain groups of students. Like, it's my job to properly identify who our foster youth are, who our McKinney-Vento youth